Quiet, deadly, and ominously secretive, submarines depict everything that makes a stealthy weapon of destruction the most feared craft of the open seas. Submarines have their own stories of inexplicable legend and lore, from ghosts, sea monsters, UFOs, lost crewmen, and captains gone mad. Here are 10 gut-wrenching submarine mysteries of the deep. The S-28. Submarines were made to disappear, rather suddenly, under the currents. But when they vanish for several days with 49 men on board, panic ensues. When World War II American submarine, the S-28, went on a training dive off the coast of Oahu on July 3, 1944, something unbeknownst to mainland operations went horribly wrong. It wasn't until 3 days later that a large slick of diesel fuel surfaced, an unfortunate indicator that all men were officially lost. Only recently did the wreckage of one of the most important lost ships in the Central Pacific finally surface. Ongoing search efforts led by the University of Hawaii's Undersea Research Laboratory and a wreck hunting organization discovered the sub 8,700 feet beneath the surface, though the exact reason for the sinking continues to be a mystery. 9. Questa 1. This is a case of one yellow submarine not made famous by the Beatles, and a historic treasure hunt went wrong. If you've ever seen the shipwrecks on Coney Island Creek in New York City, you'll know that the site renders the look and feel of skeletons protruding at any moment from the metal remains which rest there. A fascinating sight among the wreckage is a submarine bearing a rusty orangish yellow conning tower sticking from the top. Sadly, this submarine, called the Questa 1, was built for a quest that would never get fulfilled. The aim was to excavate treasure from the Andrea Doria, an ocean liner that sunk in 1956 and presently rests under the Atlantic off the coast of Massachusetts. In the 60s, a man by the name of Jerry Bianco set out to build a submarine that could submerge to the sunken ship and retrieve the valuables as his own. And the vessel was painted an awful yellow colour because it was the only paint he could afford. After 4 years of dedicated work, the sub was lowered into Coney Island Creek. Yet, since Bianco had removed the ballast as a money-saving measure, the vessel thus tipped on its side, so much that investors threw their hands in the air. Alas, all faith was lost that the craft could ever float. To this day, Questa 1 remains in the same spot it did all those years ago. Yellow like gold, yet barren of treasure. 8. The U-166. Most people are familiar with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, but little is known of the German U-boat patrol in Mexico's Gulf, used in an effort to try and sink American merchant ships right on their own shore. U-166 was the name of one of the 17 German submarines who spotted a craft belonging to the United States, a passenger fleet called the Robert E. Lee, whose alarmed passengers swore they saw a shark headed toward them. The sleek grey apparatus was streaming their way from beneath the water when suddenly a torpedo struck the ship and sent her sinking to the bottom of the deep blue. As panicked survivors clung for their safety to lifeboats, the US Navy's PC-566 dropped a depth charge in return on the U-boat. Though they never found out whether they had struck their target or not, once they returned to the base, officials announced that the matter was classified, and no one found out further details about what had been hit that day until 2001, when a Petroleum Survey's discovery of a U-boat near where the Robert E. Lee sank finally provided an answer. Today, both the American passenger fleet and the U-166 sit at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico and serve as a cryptic reminder of a German attack less than 50 miles south of the Mississippi River. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe to What Lurks Below and hit the bell to get notified of new releases such as this one. 7. The Surcouf. At the time of its 1929 launching, the French cruiser submarine, the Surcouf, was proudly known as the largest submarine in the world, At 361 feet, it was built to rival the more advanced U-boat series devised by the German Navy, and as Germany invaded the French borders during the Second World War, it became highly feared that the intruders would seize total control of the French submarines. The Surcouf was ordered to Plymouth, England. Yet, the French didn't care for the unannounced boarding of some British advocates along the way, despite both parties being on the same side, and a fight broke out upon the watercraft until 4 people died. Tension didn't cease, as suddenly all parties between the British and French forces began questioning the other's loyalty and who may be acting as a German spy. Even the British became so involved with the perplexed game of who could be trusted that they commissioned some of the French ships to attack their own. When the Surcouf was ordered to stop and refuel in Bermuda in February of 1942, she disappeared somewhere in the Caribbean and was never heard from or seen again. Several theories surfaced in the wake of the disappearance, with some blaming the Bermuda Triangle for the craft's demise. Others believe an American merchant ship collided with the French submarine, as records indicated a collision by a US steamship in those waters around that time. Despite crewmen having claimed that the shouts on board the struck vessel were in English, the fear that it was a German-controlled craft made stopping impossible. Whatever may have happened, no one knows, as today, no trace of the Surcouf, which carried a float plane in the hangar inboard the sub, nor the crew have ever been found. 6. The U-505. The best films featuring murder and mayhem at sea don't compare with the events that took place on the German-type IXC submarine U-505. When the vessel was bombed by British destroyers during World War II, chaos commenced on board. In the midst of the onslaught, the commander of the sub, Peter ZSCHECH, ruthlessly shot himself in the head in front of his entire crew, who huddled in the control room as attacks ensued outside. According to a worker by the name of Hans Gubler, the commander didn't fully die and was heard making loud sounds directly after he was hit by his own bullet. The noises were making it easier for the British aggressors to locate the crew through sonar. So, one member of the crew was quick to take a pillow and put the officer out of his misery. Protests sounded from the crew doctor, who was appalled and dismayed at the display, but other crewmen joined in and helped finish the ZSCHECH off. Without hesitation, the ship's second-in-command took over and led the crew through the attack. A success that left everyone on board safe and sound, except for ZSCHECH, of course. An eerie record of the event is preserved in time, as an entry from the day's logbook morbidly displays the words "Commandant tot" or "Commanding Officer dead," with no other comments or explanation. 5. The HL Hunley. In 2000, a crew of divers went underwater to excavate the Confederate submarine, HL Hunley, one of the world's first submarines, and the first ever combat submersible vehicle to sink an enemy warship. Astounding, however, was the sub disappeared the same day it sank the USS HOUSATONIC in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, on February 17, 1864. And it wasn't until 136 years later historians found out why. The craft was proudly recruited to serve the Confederate States of America by playing a small part in the Civil War. Yet in doing so, her fate showed both the perks and dangers of undersea warfare. How? The HL Hunley successfully sunk her target, but was also demolished to pieces in the process. Of course, no one was quite sure what happened to the submarine at the time, and the mystery of Hunley's missing crew plagued investigators for over 100 years. The subsurface watercraft was created by the owner of a large plantation and lawyer in New Orleans, Horace Lawson Hunley, who got mad, crazy mad, when the Union created a blockade to prevent him from shipping sugar and cotton. Hunley was determined to find a way to move supplies quietly at night, and thus he built a vessel that could destroy the large barges forming the blockade. As the shape of the craft reminded people of a fish, it quickly earned the nickname Fishboat and displayed amazing power and abilities that would soon churn history and make waves for naval achievements in years to come. It was one thing to encounter a historical warship, but what divers stumbled upon next was riveting. Inside the craft, there were 8 perfectly preserved skeletons, each manning a respective submarine station. None appeared alarmed or even perplexed that the underwater vehicle had been sinking, even enough to move from their posts at the time of disaster. But what happened? The HL Hunley suffered from the explosion of its own torpedo that detonated the moment she rammed the USS HOUSATONIC. The instantaneous blow rendered the men completely unconscious and unaware of harm, as all parties succumbed to a bleak fate. The submarine came to rest 1,000 feet away from the wreck of the HOUSATONIC, and it wouldn't be until over 136 years later that the men were found and their souls put to rest. 4. The K-129. The Soviet submarine, K-129, was patrolling the Atlantic Ocean, about 1,100 kilometers northeast of Bermuda, when suddenly a plug in the torpedo room began leaking uncontrollably. An engineer tried to subdue the damage, but in a moment's time, water began rushing in. Soon after the chaos occurred, a torpedo casing split, and a massive explosion killed 3 crew members before starting an even bigger flood. An extremely brave and selfless member on board decided to give his life for his crew members as he entered the nuclear compartment to cease the engine. A remarkable act, as his heroic deed allowed the submarine to quickly surface. Upon opening the hatch, however, the captain noticed something bizarre. There were 2 very large scratches along the side of the submarine, but they hadn't collided with anything along the way. The Soviet Navy suspected the cause of the scratch and explosion was from an American submarine, the USS Augusta, patrolling nearby. To this day, however, the US Navy denies any contact with the K-129. In 2010, Soviet Captain Nikolai Tushin gave an interview stating what he believes collided with the submarine instead. An unidentified underwater object called a quacker. The name was given to the object because of the sound it makes, which is a cross between a duck quack and a frog croak. The odd sounds began getting picked up by sonar operators around the Cold War, yet today, no one can be sure what a quacker is, nor what caused the demise of the K-129. 3. The UB-85. Sea monsters aren't reserved for pirate lore only. On April 30th, 1918, the crew of a German U-boat named UB-85 willingly laid their weapons down at the mercy of a British patrol boat. But why? As their ship sadly sank. The commanding officer had a bizarre excuse for why the team didn't resist. According to the sub's Captain Kretsch, the team had a strange encounter while the sub was surfaced in the wee hours of the previous night. Apparently, an uncanny creature crashed out of the water and attached itself onto the deck. It was so large, described to have large set eyes inside a horny skull, that the vessel was near sinking under the beast's burly weight. According to eyewitnesses, the creature only released its massive grip on the submarine after gunfire ensued. And even though the beast finally let go, it left the deck so damaged that the UB-85 was unable to dive under the water. As a result, the crew had no choice but to mercifully surrender when British forces came upon them. 2. USS Trepang. In 2015, a curious image surfaced in a French magazine titled Top Secret. There, showcased among its glossy pages, was a cigar-shaped unidentified flying object, spotted by an officer aboard the USS Trepang in March 1971. The Trepang was a Sturgeon-class attack submarine and the US's second ship of that name, named after a curious cucumber-like animal commonly found among coral reefs. That night, in the middle of the ocean, between Iceland and a barely inhabited Norwegian island called Jan Mayen, the Trepang was on a routine expedition when it encountered the flying craft by chance. And this wasn't the first time. The object found through the periscope by Officer John Clicker was the same object that British UFO investigator Nigel Watson claimed had been reported in various accounts all over the world since 1896. The peculiar aircraft left some critics skeptical, and others in the firm belief that undoubtedly life exists beyond our own. 1. The UB-65. Another German U-boat with horrific luck was the UB-65 from World War I. Just as the submersible ship was given the go-ahead to set out to sea, a torpedo from within the chambers exploded and injured several men. A disaster which left the second officer in command, Lieutenant Richter, dead on the scene. The ship regained composure despite the catastrophe and proceeded with orders. Just as the maiden vessel left the port, a lookout on the conning tower went white with terror as he spotted the deceased lieutenant standing there on deck. Had he returned to haunt the boat, or perhaps see it to victory? Perhaps the long, lonely days could be blamed for the accounts to come next, yet crewmen reported sightings of the spirit over and over until events got so bad, higher-ups had to intervene. Soon a pastor was summoned by the Imperial Navy to kick the spirit away, and finally, in UB-65's last stroke of luck, the vessel exploded, all on its own, off the coast of Ireland, mere moments before an American submarine was about to attack. Shocked that the aircraft went up in smokes and flames for no apparent reason whatsoever, an American officer reported seeing a dark silhouette standing on deck, seemingly sturdy and assured as the boat sank, his proud arms folded over a German officer's overcoat. With 95% of our oceans remaining a mystery, is it likely that submarines have the advantage to catch bizarre occurrences otherwise missed from the surface? Whether it be sea monsters, sunken UFOs, or surly spirits. Which is most believable? Please subscribe to What Lurks Below for more mysteries of the deep.